Allen Lund Company wishes all the owner-operators out there a Happy New Year. OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
The Federal Trade Commission has been planning to do something about predatory towing fees, but a final rule left the trucking industry in the dark. Jamie Jones of Landline Magazine joins us to discuss what changed. Brokers, some of them are good and necessary for owner-operator success, but others, well, they're not so good. I'll cover some of the latest problems that have cropped up with Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department. Since 2018, Shell has worked to show truckers how they can make their rigs more fuel efficient. We'll learn more about the company's Starship and how it's a learning experience for engineers and drivers. And finally, we've spoken on the show recently about a proposed FMCSA rule that would require much greater broker transparency, but there has been pushback from brokers. We'll have an encore of our discussion with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. And now, here's Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. We're going to spend a little time talking about predatory towing now and the lack of action on the federal level to address it so far, at least. The Federal Trade Commission was squaring itself up to do something, but they changed course. Joining us with analysis is Jamie Jones of Landline Magazine. Jamie, good to see you.
Hey, it's good to be here, Scott.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
So let's take a step back at what the Federal Trade Commission had been planning to do with regard to predatory towing. And make no mistake, they were kind of talking about doing something, but then we'll get into what they eventually did do. But what was the initial plan there?
Well, and we have to go back into 2023, the end of 2023, okay? And that's when the Federal Trade Commission came out with a proposal that would prohibit unfair or deceptive practices relating to fees for goods, services, all that stuff.
Junk fees,
yes.
That kind of thing, yep.
So what was really cool about this, and it was something that in my time covering trucking, I haven't seen this before, but FMCSA jumped on board on this one and actually filed comments in support of the FTC's proposal, and with the intention that this would help FMCSA address predatory towing and, you know, the inflated fees and everything. So all of the screaming, yelling, pleading, begging, whatever has happened, FMCSA listened, and they understand that there is a problem with predatory towing out there. So that was really encouraging to see that end of 2023, early 2024, when FMCSA jumped on this and said, yes, we're going to, we want this. Mm-hmm. And so fast forward to the end of 2024, FTC comes out with their proposal again, and they had scaled it back so bad. I mean, it still is aiming to tackle deceptive fees, but they put it so narrow in scope that FMCSA would not be able to use that to address predatory towing fees. So it was, kind of a wonk.
Yeah, it was promising. We thought maybe it was going to, be in there, and then it just vanished. It wasn't there.
Yeah, and especially when you had another agency saying, hey, this will help us.
And it will help a lot of people.
Yes,
yeah.
You would have thought that comment alone would have carried some significant weight. I just, because you don't routinely see agencies commenting on other agencies' proposals. So I think we were a little Pollyanna optimistic, thinking that this was going to be a move in the right direction. But no, November came and went, and FTC scaled it back, and it's really not going to be any help on this particular problem.
Yeah, so swing and a miss from FTC there. We didn't get what we were hoping we might get. You did touch on something, though, that I think is important to note, that FMCSA does recognize this as a big problem. They have said as much. They held a public forum, a meeting over the summer, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. Got a lot of feedback from a lot of people, essentially it told us what we already know, that this predatory towing issue is a massive problem. And FMCSA does have some things in the works here. We'll see how that process plays out. But it is encouraging that they do see this as a problem, and they are thinking at least about doing something. What that looks like, we don't know.
Yeah, when you have an agency, again, they jumped on that chance that they had with the FTC, but then we also had this public meeting in June, and Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, was part of that meeting, and he even acknowledged the problem with predatory towing. So when you have an agency recognizing it, you have the Secretary of Transportation recognizing it, you've made some traction. But I love how Doug Morris, our OOIDA Director of State and Government Affairs, put it. He said, let's not check a box and say we had another meeting. Let's do something about it. So, leave it to Doug to keep the heat cranked up on him, and that's what's got to happen. Everybody can recognize it's a problem, but we can't sit here, holding our hands out going, well, but we don't know what to do. We have to find a solution.
Well, and this is the thing, too, with the change in administrations on January 20th, we have seen some momentum and at least an acknowledgement of this problem, I think, over the past few years. And it feels like that kind of awareness is growing. Hopefully now that will continue on with the new administration, and hopefully they recognize that this issue is an issue as well, and we'll find ways to tackle it and keep up the work that we've been seeing on this issue in particular, because it has been encouraging. In the meantime, as we wait for something on the federal level, we're looking at the states. It may be something that goes a bit more quickly on the state level, because they are able to kind of move a little more quickly. Missouri is a good example of this. They've been looking at this issue for a number of years now, and we have a new governor coming in the next couple weeks, I think, here, and a new bill has been introduced in Missouri as well.
Yeah. So we've had a bill that has been introduced in 2 previous sessions of the state legislature and got to the point of being signed by the governor. So we got it out of the state legislature, and the governor vetoed both times. And you have to wonder what special interest group is in his ear to do that. So yes, with him leaving office, we have a third attempt at it. And there's some momentum with incoming lawmakers at the state level paying attention to this issue. We have a new governor, so it's a fresh slate in that regard that we can hopefully get it across the finish line and get a governor's signature on it. The thing that you have to keep in mind when you leave it up to states to address these issues, we're going to have a patchwork.
Right.
And, some states are going to have really, really good protective laws on the books, and others are going to be the Wild West with nothing. So that's why, yay, that we get traction in these states and can solve some of these problems, and other groups are working in states to do the same thing. But it comes down ultimately that what we need is like a federal minimum standard.
Right, yeah.
And, that way the states will have a template, if you will, to work off of, that they could put in these state laws to really put some teeth on this problem, because everybody loses on predatory towing fees. Insurance companies, that jacks up other people's rates.
Even the towing companies have said that they're bearing the brunt of people who aren't paying.
The unreputable companies are really struggling. So it's something that we have to keep the focus on. Hopefully we might even get some legislation introduced at the federal level. I just know it's an issue that is near and dear to OOIDA's heart, and they're fighting hard on it.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, reach out to your state lawmakers and let them know that this is an issue, and maybe something that they can take up on the state level as well. Keep that relationship, keep that line open, I should say.
100%.
There you go. Jamie, we appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Oh, you're welcome, Scott.
More details on this story on landline.media. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. Next, I'll cover some of the latest broker problems we're seeing with Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department. Ashley Blackford tells us about Shell's Starship truck, and I'll discuss the broker transparency proposal and some opposition from brokers with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
At Truck Stop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on TruckStop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline now. Welcome back. Brokers. Some of them are good and necessary for some owner-operators' success, but others, well, they're not so good. But it's not the established brokers, good or bad, who are causing the most problems. Right now, it's the people pretending to be brokers or motor carriers who are making a mess of things across the industry. So, what's going on and how do you protect yourself? Here to fill us in are Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here, Mark.
Thanks as always.
Oh, yeah, glad to have you. Obviously, our topic here is fraud, and we've got I know one of the big problems with fraud, as I kind of said at the top, is this thing of people acting as brokers who aren't really brokers. But go ahead.
Yeah, Mark. There's a big issue going on out there in the industry, and it's like you mentioned, it causes all kinds of havoc. You've got whether it's a motor carrier that books a load and then rebooks it out, which would be the essence of a double broker. Or whether it's just a fraudster that gets into the mix that books loads acting as a motor carrier and then turns around and acts as a broker and throws it out, and with no intentions on paying anybody, but that not only costs the broker, but that costs the motor carrier, who actually put out all the expense of hauling the load, only to find that they didn't do their due diligence beforehand, check them out, and now it's going to cost them big.
I know that we've talked about this particular kind of fraud before, but I'm wondering if they found new and creative ways to screw people. I mean, let's face it, they always come up with some new scheme, but is there one since the last time we spoke about this?
Well, I'm sure there are new ones that I'm not even aware of as of right now, because these folks sit around and this is what they do instead of, like most folks go to work and do their time. And, these folks sit around and their job is to find new ways to scam people. I would say probably some of the latest things we saw is, people getting into a motor carrier's MCS 150, renaming or redirecting the information, so that they look like a legitimate carrier, and all of a sudden the fraudsters getting the emails and the phone calls for that motor carrier. That's a big one. There's a lot of scams out there. The email scams, what they call them, phishing scams, going on where you would get an email, and there's a new one. I think Aaron come across this the other day. That what were they asking for?
Well, it was part of the new entrance safety audit.
That's right.
There's all sorts of variations from it, and they'll have you go to a website that looks legitimate or not. Regardless, you put all this personal information between yourself and the business, and then they're able to access your DOT PIN and go ahead and change the email, phone number, even address that's on file that people look at, like insurance and brokers, and so. That's just one way. Your dispatcher that you used 6 months ago that didn't work out has access to all this information. Sometimes you have to look at who you've actually hired and done business with yourself too, because sometimes fraudsters are the people closest to you or that have worked for your business in the past as well.
I know a lot of this was where they would book someone to haul a load, the person would haul, and then the broker would disappear with the money. But in particular, some of the ones you were talking about there, are we also still having these where they basically fake out being the carrier, as you mentioned? They get in there with the MCS 150 and they start getting emails and they're stealing the load. I mean, is that still a major problem out there?
Yeah, it's a major problem, but there's an end date to that. They can't do that forever because phone calls will be made at some point, as far as that goes. That can last maybe 2 or 3 months, I would say, at the most. And that's if you're doing your due diligence and checking the safer website and checking your information as the carrier yourself. it's recommended that you check all that information at least once a month to help protect yourself. And if you do notice something that has been changed or that is different, then you can take the necessary steps to make that change. I mean, also another popular one, and Tom knows this just as well as I do, all these people that want to buy your MC number, and they also want to buy your phone number and all your information, and then they pose to be you.
Yeah, I've talked to several individuals that have fallen for that. They get a call, and they're, maybe at the end of their trucking career, and they're thinking of hanging it up. Well, so they get a call showing, because they show an insurance cancellation, which is public information, and these folks use this against you. So they get a call saying, hey, we're looking to buy MCs and DOT numbers and such. And while that's, you just have to be careful, because what will happen is they'll use your good name that you have built up over the years and commit fraud based on your good name. And you'll get a call, a month or so sometime down the road from somebody saying, hey, where's this load at? And they're like, oh, I'm not in business anymore. I sold my stuff out. Well, they don't change anything. They want to use your good name and use that to defraud others. I mean, there are just so many different ways. And back to these emails, this phishing, one of the things that we do in the compliance department is we take calls from folks that question these emails, because they, everybody knows there's fraud out there, but some of this stuff looks very, very legitimate. So we take calls from these folks, and based on what they're telling us out of the email, or sometimes we'll just say, hey, send it to me, let me take a look. And, I would say probably, I would almost say 10 out of 10, but at least 9 out of 10 of the calls that we get are fraudsters, or some fraud involved with that. So, if you get an email and it's saying, hey, you've got an audit coming up, yet, you've been in business for a while and you get clean inspections and all this, I mean, there's no reason for an audit to be coming up. So give us a call. Let us help you figure out if it's real or not.
Well, and that's a big part of what we do is we provide that kind of service, and it's a free service to our members here. So I advise you, take advantage of it. That's what we're here for. We're here to help.
And folks, if you do want to take advantage of that, you just need to dial 816-229-5791. Again, that's 816-229-5791, and ask for compliance. Guys, one of the other things that I think I've kind of heard chatter about, and possibly from the two of you, among others, is that some of these operators that are committing this fraud now are located in other countries. They're located overseas. I hear a lot about Eastern Europe. I hear a lot about some of the nations in Africa. What sort of challenges does that present if they're located there and you get entangled in some kind of fraud?
Well, I mean, it makes it even more difficult. I'll say the FMCSA and the feds, they don't do, I don't feel, enough to prevent this stuff from happening. And then when you throw in a foreign actor, somebody from overseas, I mean, all they can really do is maybe shut them down on this aspect, but then they'll open up another lane and come right back under another name and another. There's no way to, or in my understanding, the way the feds say it, there's no way for them to follow up on this and actually go overseas and get these bad actors. I mean, if they're not on U.S. soil, it makes it pretty hard to make an arrest.
And I would think, too, it'd be pretty hard to take any kind of civil legal action against them.
Yeah. I mean, it's money that's gone. It's just gone. You didn't get paid, or you lost your load, or, the variety of different things that could happen here. And there's just no way to recoup from it, I mean, even as far as you go and file on a bond, but even some of these fraud actors that have posed as a fake broker, that bond, if they have a legitimate bond in place, it's $75,000. Well, if you've got $1 million worth of freight rates rolling down the road, I mean, you split that up, and that's pennies on the dollar if you get anything at all.
Yeah. Although there is a regulation under consideration. Actually, I'm trying to remember if it was a final rule or if it was still in the proposed rulemaking process. But basically, for broker financial responsibility, that if someone is starting to make claims on that and it drops below $75,000, that their authority's gone.
That is true, and that will be a help. And I believe that is a rule, but if I'm not mistaken, the feds put off enforcing it. They've kicked that can down the road too, as they're so frequently do.
Is this to an extent a matter of, number one, don't take the load unless it pays what you need, and don't take the load if it's too good to be true?
Well, and I was going to say, not just if it pays what you need. Obviously, you need to know your cost of operation. But if it pays more than what you see that lane paying, that's a red flag. And these fraudsters use this to prey on folks that are having a difficult time out there. You come across the load and you say, wow, this is a good paying load. This will help me. This will make things right for me. And so you jump on it without doing your background, without checking them out to make sure they are who they are, without getting, if you use a factoring company, even if you go through your factoring services credit system to check them out, how do you know that that is actually who you're talking to, is that broker? So, you got to do your homework. And a lot of times we speak to people and they will, readily tell us, man, I found this load. It was a good paying load. And now I can't get a hold of the broker. Man, that just puts butterflies in my stomach because I know what's coming, and it's not going to be good. And, this is usually a carrier that is already struggling, as many are. And something like that can just put them out. So, do your homework. Make sure that you know who you're working with. And if it's too good to be true, trust your gut. It probably is.
I think, too, there's something to be said for the idea that bad times generate desperation, that we know it's hard out there right now. We know the rates are just terrible, but you can't let your guard down.
No, and if you allow yourself to fall into these traps, I mean, then it's not just the low rates that put you out, but it's the scams, and they've put more than one carrier out of business. There's no doubt.
You mentioned earlier that the load that pays just a little bit too much to be real is a red flag. What are other red flags we can warn people about so maybe they can avoid this?
Pending insurance cancellations is one. A relatively new brokerage authority, 6 months or less, is another one.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest issues that we've seen is most of these scammers have a brand new brokerage. And if you're a brand new brokerage in this market, I would check them out.
Yeah. I'd also, in addition to that, I'd say that only correspondence by email if they're not going to answer your phone call. If their phone call doesn't sound like they're real or who they say they are, verifying that. Another, and nobody talks about this. I haven't seen this anywhere. Why don't you go make the phone call and see them in person? Yeah. Right. If you're in the area, go see them. Go see where they are, or video.
Video call.
Video call them. I mean, these are things that are extra steps. But in this industry, in this age, these are things that you need to do to vet these, as well as, like Tom was saying, use your factoring company's credit service if you utilize a factoring service. These load boards are fine and dandy, and they have their own little credit rating system. But that's not enough. You have to go and do above and beyond.
Yeah. If you're not doing your homework, it's going to cost you.
Okay, we've got just a few minutes left here, or I'm sorry, just a few seconds. Is there anything else really quickly that you guys want to throw in on this topic?
It just comes back to doing your due diligence. Check out the FMCSA's website. If you get scammed on their FMCSA's website, they do have a list of procedures that you can go through to alert others. I'm not going to say it's going to get your money for you, though.
Well, guys, thank you very much for all the information.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Thanks as always, Mark. Glad to be here.
Been talking with Aaron Lynch and Tom Crowley of OOIDA's Compliance Department. And folks, again, the phone number is 816-229-5791. We'll be right back. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Capital Reman, the leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, has partnered with OOIDA to offer exclusive member benefits. Visit CapitalReman.com today to support America's transportation industry and take advantage of your benefits.
Landline Now, welcome back. An initiative toward a lower carbon future has been in full swing since 2018. The Shell Starship is an aerodynamic, super fuel-efficient heavy-duty truck. Ryan Muntree is a project leader and research and development engineer for Shell's Global Solutions Technology Group. I recently spoke with him about how the Shell Starship initiative got started back in 2018.
The transport sector is basically fundamental to the global economy. It touches almost every part of our day-to-day lives. It supports economic growth. It's responsible for creating jobs and basically connecting people. Essentially, services such as like healthcare, education, logistics services. So it counts for around, I think, 35% of global energy usage, and on-road freight is about, I think, a third of that total. So it generates about 9% of carbon dioxide globally. That's a big number. And you have these carbon emission regulations that are basically on the horizon. Their absolute emissions from the road sector freight needs to come down by almost 60% by 2050. So if you look at the sector that we support and the scale or the size of decarbonization that's facing it, you start to get a feel for why we launched these types of large-scale demonstrations or impactful demonstrations, like we call them, in these sectors. Most of the sector's emissions are attributed to about, I think there's about 217 million vehicles in operation that supply this global supply chain. And most of that sector's emissions can be attributed to about, I think it's like 63 million or 65 million heavy-duty, medium-duty trucks. And they all have different power and weight and range utilization. So that represents about, I think it's 29% of global fleet and basically on-road freight CO2 emissions. And of all of those trucks, diesel is the primary energy mover. So I think 90% of the fuel used in those trucks is diesel. So basically, as Shell, as we're a global energy provider, and one of our specific mandates is, we have a climate ambition to become a net zero emission energy business by 2050 or sooner. In line with that, we support the transport industry and our customers developing products and solutions that enable greener pathways. So helping these hard-to-abate sectors achieve their own net zero emission targets.
How has the program evolved with each generation over the years?
Basically, it's evolved with the energy transition. You saw in the first two iterations of the truck. In 2018, we launched Starship 1.0, which was a diesel powertrain, primarily because at that point in time, that was the state of the technology that was being utilized in the market. And Starship's always basically been about leveraging and utilizing technologies that are relevant at the time and are most innovative, currently available, which is being basic. If you put an underline under that, it's what's available and what can be utilized now. So with Starship 1.0, which was in 2018, a lot of the technologies featured on the truck were centered around how do we make diesel as efficient as possible. Because at that point in time, there were around 2.5 million trucks in operation supporting logistic services around North America. And all of those were diesel. So we wanted to look at focusing our energy and efforts at making the best of those available utilities and trucks that are on the road now as efficient as possible. So that was 1.0 and 2.0. And then you start to see the sector start to evolve because technology started to progress, infrastructure started to improve. So things like technologies around battery electric vehicles, you're starting to see developments around natural gas. A lot of that basically the progression of that enabled us to start to look at solutions for Starship 3.0 that were focused purely around natural gas. So you see the program, the technologies, the OEMs, the service providers, the SMEs that were involved in helping us develop the truck. It's been a natural progression, but it's always been driven by how the technology and the sector itself has been progressing at the time. This is not focused on the next generation because that would be programs like that I look at specifically at the time where I was looking at hydrogen or hydrogen fuel cell. This for where it's positioned and for each year, because we launched in 2018 was with Starship 1.0, and then in 2020 we launched 2.0, and then on the back of 2022 going to 2023 we launched 3.0. And at each we used the most relevant technology that we felt was pivotal to the sector at that point in time.
Now, with Starship 3.0 powered by a Cummins natural gas engine and using renewable natural gas, what are the environmental benefits compared to a traditional diesel-powered truck?
Natural gas engines have this added benefit of being able to run on renewable natural gas. And RNG is basically it's a biogas. It's a mixture of gases. So it's like 50 to 75% methane, carbon dioxide, hydrogen, sulfide, water, and there's like trace amounts of other gases in there. And this constitutes basically when organic matter, like we take food or animal waste, is broken down by microorganisms and we do this in the absence of oxygen. It's through a process called anaerobic digestion. We then generate this biogas. But at that stage, it still has a fair amount of low value constituents. So things like carbon dioxide, water, hydrogen sulfide, these all need to be removed. So when we do that, when we filter that out, we generate this renewable natural gas. And in that form, when it's processed and filtered, it can be injected directly into the natural gas grid and used as a fuel. So it's pretty fungible in that sense. And CARB, which is the California Air Resources Board, it classifies RNG sourced from dairy manure, which is what we run Starship 3.0 on, as having a 250% reduction in life cycle greenhouse gases. So when you replace diesel with RNG, so if you took a diesel truck and you replaced it with an equivalent RNG truck running on RNG, you have this added benefit of a 250% reduction in life cycle greenhouse gases. And this all comes from the fact that the methane that's associated, it has a 28 times greater global warming potential. They call it a GWP than carbon dioxide. And what that basically means is the methane is actually more potent than carbon dioxide. And when it's left to its own devices, in the sense that agricultural waste is left to decompose and to expire and to, in the atmosphere without us even touching it, it's a more harmful effect. And repurposing it through this RNG process, through this anaerobic digestion, we're repurposing this waste as green energy or green fuel. So that's where the reduction comes from in the greenhouse gases. That's one benefit. The other is when you burn, whether you're burning natural gas or RNG, renewable natural gas in an engine, it has similar performance characteristics compared to a diesel. It's quieter though. It's much cleaner, and although it's still a fossil fuel, natural gas produces less CO2 emissions in terms of tailpipe emissions. So it requires a smaller after-treatment system, almost no nitrogen oxides, very little particulate matter or volcanic oxide compounds. Those are VOCs. So these low emission technologies, the engines coupled with the fuel, they offer many incentives, not just from a total cost of ownership perspective, but also in terms of, more significantly now in this specifically with where we are in this energy transition, just in terms of the reduced carbon footprint.
I'm curious, how does the Shell Starship 3.0 demonstrate the potential of integrating innovations like aerodynamics, lightweighting, and alternative fuels into the commercial trucking industry?
Yeah, so the truck is, it serves as a platform for showcasing the best of innovative technologies in the market at that point in time. So central to this truck's design is this concept of freight ton efficiency. It's about carrying the most amount of a payload using the least amount of energy. And to do that, we do it through a couple of enablers. There's four key design principles that we follow or we try to adhere to when we built the truck. These design principles like go heavy on the payload, and that improves our freight carrying capacity and ultimately drives our freight ton efficiency up. There's things like the aerodynamic package, where we try to reduce. This is one of the more significant opposing forces acting on the truck that eats away at fuel economy and effectively reduces our freight ton efficiency. So we look at technologies and components on the truck that we can utilize to help drive down the improve drag reduction. There's things like rolling resistance is another significant opposing force on the truck. This basically refers to the friction that's created by the tire's contact with the road. Basically, when the tire's under extreme loads, and with our truck we're going very heavy, that repeated flexing of the tire sidewalls, that creates heat. The heat creates friction. The friction is what basically slows down or eats away at our fuel economy, because the engine has to work much harder to generate energy to overcome that friction. So we really look to partner with OEMs and suppliers that help us target these areas. So the technologies on the truck itself are dialed in to reducing these specific areas. So with the tires we've partnered with Bridgestone. On the engine itself, obviously Cummins is kind of the leader in terms of natural gas engines, and we utilize their expertise and their hardware to kind of improve on the efficiency of the truck all around. The last element of this is around driver behavior, which is a significant component. It involves not only creating a platform or truck that can be driven by not just a novice driver or an experienced driver, but helping them understand the technology that's available to them and how to leverage it when they're out on the road, giving them the ability to plan and optimize their routes. So there's a lot of key driver aids that are included on the truck that take away some of the guesswork that the drivers have to do when they're out there on the road.
How does Shell envision the future of sustainable freight transport?
These emission abatement targets that are on the horizon. So you've got, I think there's a 80% reduction in CO2 intensity by 2050, and it's less than 30 years to achieve that target. And the global fleet is already starting to transition to these zero emission technologies, like renewable natural gas being one of them. I mentioned hydrogen fuel cell, hydrogen ICE, battery electric vehicles. The challenge with all of this is there's a time to materiality in terms of how quickly we develop it, test it, and de-risk it. Because it's not just the hardware, it has to be properly tested and de-risked. And then you have to have the infrastructure in place to support the customer when it's in the field. So all of that's going to take time. And what Shell is trying to do right now is create solutions that help bridge the gap in the interim. So what can we do right now? That's again what Starship's always been about, is what can we do in the immediate future right now to address the challenges we're having while these technologies come online. Natural gas only became a viable option for us once we knew not just the fuel and the fueling infrastructure was there, but the hardware itself was available, and there was a robust maintenance and fueling infrastructure in place to support the customer. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to roll out this demonstration. So that's a big part of it. And basically, to kind of, a long story short, is that we see a potential demonstration going forward, or any kind of development work we do in this space will always be tied to how the sector is evolving and what's the next step gap in that. How do we take it forward with a platform that's now already in place?
That was Ryan Muntry talking about the Shell Starship. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. Stay tuned for more after this.
Running on ultra-low sulfur diesel? Stay protected this winter with Howe's Diesel Treat and Diesel Lifeline. Steer clear of gel and ice with North America's #1 trusted brand. Find Howe's products nationwide at select retailers, auto parts stores, truck stops, and on Amazon.com.
Truckdown.com. Whenever you have a breakdown, you need Truckdown.com. 24/7 access to 40,000 verified heavy-duty repair vendors nationwide.
Vendor choice. Owner-operators rejoice.
Truckdown.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Last week, we talked on the program about a regulatory effort that would require far greater transparency on the part of brokers. Here with more of what's happening on the issue is Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Bryce, how are you doing?
I'm good, Mark. How about yourself?
Very well, thank you. Let's kind of start, before we get into the weeds of kind of other parts of this, with the proposed rule itself. I'm wondering if you could very briefly review what are the main points in this proposal to increase broker transparency?
Yes, so there's four main points, four main changes that FMCSA is proposing. And again, this is amending existing regulations that say all parties to a broker transaction have a right to review those records. The first change FMCSA is proposing is to require that all records be kept in an electronic format. We think that's something this day and age that should be pretty non-controversial and frankly makes a lot of sense. The second change is a little more nuanced or kind of in the weeds, but it proposes eliminating a distinction in the regulations between brokerage and non-brokerage services. And they say that this is something that goes back a number of years with how the agency and some of FMCSA's predecessor agencies had regulated brokers and the industry, but basically it's sort of an outdated part of the regulations that they're proposing to update. The third change that they're proposing is that a broker would have to, it would make clear that a broker has a regulatory obligation to provide these records, a copy of these records, when it's requested by a carrier or somebody else who's a party to the transaction. And this is a little nuanced, but the important thing here is FMCSA is saying that brokers have a duty, they have an obligation under the regulations to do this. It's not simply a right that's held by carriers that they can waive. It's a duty imposed by the government that brokers have to abide by. And the fourth proposal is to require that the records be provided within 48 hours after it's requested. So to sum it up, basically the proposal would require that if a carrier requests a copy of these records, that it be given to them in an electronic format within 48 hours. And the regulation tries to make clear that the brokers have a regulatory obligation to comply with that.
Okay. Now, this was the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration basically reacting to a petition by OOIDA and also one from the Small Business and Trucking Coalition, I think.
Yep.
But the brokers group, the TIA, the Transportation Intermediaries Association, also petitioned FMCSA kind of on the other side of this. What did they ask for?
So this is going back to 2020. So as you mentioned, OOIDA and SBTC petitioned around May 2020. And then in turn, TIA petitioned in August 2020 to basically say, let's get rid of these regulations altogether. So instead of improving them and instead of abiding by regulations that are in place, TIA just wanted them done away with. And their argument was that, these are a vestige of a bygone era when the government heavily regulated the transportation industry, and they have no place in our modern, competitive, transparent transportation system. It's kind of obvious now, FMCSA is moving forward with the petitions that we had given them, but back in 2023, FMCSA denied TIA's petition. And part of the reason was they said that these regulations are important for the promotion of fairness and efficiency in the transportation industry. And, as I'm sure maybe we'll touch on here, or definitely as this conversation moves forward about FMCSA's proposal to, improve broker transparency, that's going to be a theme that comes up again. So FMCSA didn't think it was in the, public's best interest or the transportation industry's best interest to eliminate these because it would have a negative impact on fairness and efficiency.
It's interesting. One of the things you said there that they contended was that today's transportation industry is transparent, and they used that word again in a recent statement about this proposed rule. But I'm kind of curious what part they think is actually transparent right now.
Yeah, there's obviously for small carriers that have been working with brokers and have been denied access to this information, there's not a whole lot that's transparent about it. I think their TIA, and some others are trying to misdirect on this issue. And what they're saying is, for our publicly traded companies, you can go out and see our earnings reports and see the presentations we give, to investors, so you can learn how our business is doing and what kind of margins we're making. There's plenty of transparency there. They're also claiming that just by going on load boards and seeing the different loads and the different rates that are available, there's plenty of transparency into the market and what sort of rates are being offered. So sure, there's some transparency. That is I guess a form of transparency, but it's distracting from the fact that there are existing regulations in black and white that have been ignored for far too long that would provide very specific and important transparency for carriers who are working with brokers. While kind of the earnings reports and the rates posted to a public load board might be helpful in some ways, it still doesn't address some of the issues that these regulations address.
Okay. Now, OOIDA has put out a call to action on this topic, and I'm wondering if you can walk us through what is the association asking truckers to do?
So we're really asking truckers to share their experience on these regulations and why broker transparency is important to them. And I think at this initial step, we're still, I should make clear that we're going to continue to encourage participation from our members and from truckers. We've kind of gotten through the proposal at this point, but we're still kind of formulating our feedback, and we will certainly be sharing more information with our members and people who are signed up for our call to actions. So at this initial point, if you want to go out and share your experience, share why transparency is important, and share why it's important that you have access to these records, that's absolutely something you should do now. But I think moving forward, too, the comment period is open for about 60 days from now. We will be providing more information, a little more specifics for other folks who maybe want a little bit more help in crafting their comments. But it's so important that drivers and carriers stay involved with this, because that is how this is going to be moved forward. That's the only way that this is going to be moved forward, is if the agencies continue to hear about this.
Well, and I know that going back to a different rulemaking, when the rulemaking on speed limiters, our proposal on that came out, truckers made, I think, in excess of 16,000 comments, and it really did have an effect on the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I know sometimes it's easy to get cynical, and sometimes it's easy to feel like we're on here at the radio talking about these same issues over and over, and nothing ever gets done. And certainly some things, not everything, we're going to win 100% on everything. But this is one of those issues, and speed limiters is another issue where participation makes a difference. By gumming up FMCSA with over 15,000 comments saying this is a bad idea, that forced them to take their time and work through these comments. Going back on this broker transparency issue, going all the way back to 2020 when you had truckers protesting in front of the White House, then you had these petitions to make improvements to the rules and comments following up on that, we can see that incremental progress. So it does not get done. It will not get done if people don't participate and don't make their voices heard. So I know we sound a little bit like a broken record when we say this, but getting involved does make a difference. In this case, it's helped to make it move things in the right direction, but we know there's a lot more work to be done and to make sure the potential final rule on this is even better.
Excellent. Well, Bryce, we're out of time, but thank you very much for all the information.
Yes, thank you.
I've been talking with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. And folks, we will provide a direct link to where you can look at this proposed regulation and make your comments at our website, landlinenow.com. Again, that's at our website, landlinenow.com. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and information. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
My kids.
Chrome. And I am
I am.
a professional truck driver.
And together, we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us.
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.